If your loved one's dementia suddenly feels worse, the answer may not be the dementia. It might be blood sugar, blood pressure, kidney function, oxygen levels, or a medication overlap. And the real issue may be that no one is coordinating the care of all of those. And when you notice sudden changes, I'm sure it's natural to assume it's the progression of the disease because that assumption, it feels logical. But very often, what you're witnessing is not disease acceleration per se, but it's systems failure. And this distinction really matters. Here is what I commonly hear: she was stable for months and then suddenly became more confused. Or he was managing just fine, but now he's irritable and then he'll become extremely fatigued. Or I'll get, wow, it feels like their dementia just jumped 5 stages overnight. Because as their caregiver, you're going to notice increased confusion, agitation, fatigue, falls, hallucinations, or when they suddenly start to withdraw. And logically, that surface level conclusion becomes that their dementia has become worse. So then you call the PCP's office and you probably get their nurse and you explain to them what's happening, and they say they'll get back with you later in the afternoon. Or, wow, it sounds like you need to come in for a visit. And you explain all these things to your PCP, and they might adjust one of their dementia medications based on everything that you've said, or they might add something for the behaviors that you're describing. Or maybe they just tell you this is progression and nothing is adjusted at all, and you're in and out in 10 minutes. But as a caregiver, have you noticed how often someone has stepped back and actually asked you the questions like, well, what else is going on in your home? What else has changed? If they have diabetes, has there been a shift in their sugars? Is it high? Is it low? How's their blood pressure? Is it fluctuating at all? Or does it seem like it's been pretty stable for you over the past couple of weeks? Are they taking in enough fluids? How are their oxygen levels? Or how did they sleep last night? Are they sleeping for you? Or what was the last medication that was started by one of your specialists? So, on the surface, if nobody's asking you those questions, then what can happen is it looks like a neurological problem. And I've had this happen in my very own practice. When things get presented that way, and I haven't had the opportunity to ask any questions, then superficially, it can look like it's a neurological problem. It can look like it's a behavioral problem. But dementia, it doesn't exist in a little tiny contained box. It's not an isolated disease. It doesn't exist in isolation, and that is where the misunderstanding starts. And I've had a lot of caregivers say, I wish I could just go to one person and have them manage everything. But see, the healthcare system, it's built in fragments. Neurology manages cognition, the primary care provider manages the chronic disease, cardiology is going to manage your heart and your blood pressure, while endocrinology is going to manage their thyroid and diabetes. Each provider is doing their job. And yet, nobody is required to coordinate how these conditions react, how these conditions interact inside of a vulnerable brain. And this is what episodic care looks like. But dementia, it requires longitudinal coordination. Let me give you an example. I recently had a man who was in his, I think he was in his late 70s, and he had moderate dementia with long-standing type 2 diabetes. And he was showing increased confusion and irritability over about 2 weeks. So she took him to his neurologist, and the neurologist increased his dementia medication. But at that time, nobody talked to her about his blood sugars, and nobody checked his hemoglobin A1C and what the trend in that was. And no one asked her how often his blood sugar was dipping below 70. And when she finally came to me and I started investigating his blood sugar logs, he had so many days where he dipped below the 70 mark. He was refusing to eat, stating that she poisoned the food, or he didn't want to eat that because he just didn't feel like it was good enough, Whatever the reason was, he had multiple days where his blood sugar was dipping way below 70. And see, a low blood sugar in a cognitively intact adult, it can cause shakiness and sweating. Now, in someone with dementia, that can look like increased confusion and agitation all day long. So, what was being labeled as progression was actually metabolic instability. The sugars were dipping too low, and the system, it treated the behavior, it treated the neurological portion, but it didn't look at the physiology. And that is the gap. And the issue here is not just dementia progression. The issue is lack of coordinated care across the chronic illness continuum. Let's look at the physiology of diabetes for a second. When blood sugar drops significantly, the brain is going to become less efficient at processing information. That hypoglycemia, it can cause lethargy, increased confusion, irritability, and blurred thinking. And in dementia, the brain is already compromised. And if you add that glucose instability, well, then symptoms, they're going to amplify. And it's not because their dementia became more advanced, it's because metabolism shifted. Another example would be hypertension and blood pressure variability, because blood pressure that's too high, it can contribute to vascular stress and cognitive dysfunction. And blood pressures that drop too low are going to reduce cerebral perfusion. Less blood flow to the brain means dizziness, fatigue, falls, and temporarily worsening of confusion. And what I found is that many older adults with dementia are overtreated for high blood pressure. And lower blood pressure on paper may look great, but if it goes too low, that cerebral perfusion, your person's cognition is going to decline. And if those things aren't looked at, then it's going to be labeled as progression and not perfusion instability. So I'd like to give you the tips that I give to my people. When evaluating this strategically, I would examine the following 4 layers. The first layer is medical alignment. Are the chronic illnesses optimized for a cognitively impaired brain? And by this, I mean, is the diabetes being managed appropriately, or is it too aggressive for your person? Is the blood pressure that they have appropriate for the stage of dementia? Is their kidney function being monitored closely? And is their oxygen levels stable enough to get oxygen to their brain and keep them stable and not more confused? The second layer that I would look at is medication interactions. Are any of the medications overlapping in ways that might make your person's cognition worse? Because sedating medications, anticholinergics, blood pressure medications all cause hypotension. And obviously, glucose lowering medications are going to cause hypoglycemia. This might look like monitoring your person's vitals a couple of times throughout the day, because if your person is having some sort of reaction, the solution is not to increase their dementia medication or a behavior medication. It's actually realigning the timing and dosing of the medications that treat chronic illness and conditions. The third layer is physiological stability. How's your person's hydration status? How are their electrolytes? How's their sleep? How's their oxygen levels? Are all the other metabolic factors stable? Kidney disease can affect urine output. And if urine output isn't adequate, that can affect how toxins are cleared from your person's body. And when kidney function declines, then metabolic waste can accumulate, and that can produce cognitive decline, lethargy, and increased confusion in your person. The last layer is caregiver communication. Is someone integrating all of this information for you across providers? Are you bringing your blood sugar logs to your neurology appointment? Is your primary care aware of the behavioral shifts that have been happening? And is your cardiologist aware that your person is having increased falls? Because if no one is connecting the information, then your care is going to constantly look reactive. Coordinated care is going to reduce those fluctuations. And when chronic illness isn't being talked about and those interactions aren't being had, several things can happen. Like your person's dementia medications are increased unnecessarily, or sedating medications are added that weren't ever needed. falls increase, hospitalization can increase, and you might start believing that the decline is accelerating when it's actually metabolic instability that's driving these symptoms. And then your confidence levels are decreased. And honestly, the long term consequences is faster functional loss. And it's not because the dementia progressed, but it's because the physiological needs went left unmet. And fragmented care creates a cascading decline. And when you go to your doctor with a list of symptoms or a list of issues that you've been having, you're not overreacting and you're not missing something that's obvious. You've been navigating a fragmented system, one that wasn't built for dementia caregivers. And when no one has your back and is connecting the diagnoses, you're left responding to the symptoms without any context. But when you have a strategy, you get your control back. And clarity, it's going to restore your steadiness. If you want systems level clarity about your specific situation, that's exactly what we do inside of the Care Shift. You bring the questions, and I bring the clinical strategy. Enrollment's now open, and the link is in the comments below.